I never thought I'd be sitting here telling this story, but after everything that's happened and after a year of keeping it bottled up, I feel like it's finally time. It started like any other weekend. My best friend Kyle and I were hanging out at his place. We've been close since middle school, played ball together, pulled all-nighters gaming, you name it. That night, we stayed up late watching the playoffs, eating garbage food, yelling at the TV, like we always did. Kyle crashed out on the couch. I figured I'd sleep there too, but his mom, Jenna, poked her head in and said, "You can take the guest room if you want. It's already made up." I was surprised she was still awake. She smiled, but something about her looked off tired maybe, or distracted. I just said, "Thanks," and grabbed my stuff, and grabbed my... A little later, I couldn't sleep. You know, that restless feeling where your brain just won't shut off. So I got up to grab a glass of water from the kitchen, and there she was, Jenna, sitting at the table in her robe, cup of tea in her hands, staring at nothing. She looked up at me, kind of startled, then smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep either. I nodded. Yeah, just needed some water. She motioned to the seat across from her. "Sit a minute. Keep me company." I hesitated but sat down. It was quiet calm. Her robe was wrapped tight, her hair tied back, and she looked like someone carrying the weight of 100 things. She took a sip of tea and asked me how things were going with school, with work, with life. I told her the truth. Things were okay, but I felt stuck, lost even. I didn't know where I was headed. I told her my parents didn't really get me, that I felt like I was just floating through life. It just came out. To my surprise, she opened up too. She said she felt the same way sometimes, that marriage and motherhood weren't all they were cracked up to be. Sometimes I wonder who I even am anymore outside of being a mom, a wife, she said. Like I just disappeared somewhere along the way. We sat there for almost an hour talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that feels rare where you drop the small talk and just speak. It was quiet and real. I saw her differently after that, not as Kyle's mom, but as a person, a woman, someone with thoughts, fears, regrets. At some point, she looked at the clock and said, "You should try to get some sleep." I stood up but didn't move right away. We just looked at each other. It wasn't flirty, it wasn't weird, but it was intense, like something had shifted. She broke the moment. "Good night," she said with a half smile. I nodded and went back to the guest room, but sleep didn't come easy. That night, something began, nothing physical. No lines crossed, but it was the first thread in something I didn't understand yet. I just knew I'd never look at her the same way again. After that night, things started changing, but not in a way I thought they would. At first, it was little things, small, seemingly innocent moments that added up over time. But looking back, they were the first signs. It started when Jenna began reaching out to me more. It wasn't anything huge, just asking for small favors. But somehow these little requests started to feel different, more personal, more intentional. She texted me, "Hey, can you come by and help me move a few boxes? Kyle's away and I'm trying to reorganize." I didn't think much of it. Kyle was always busy with his girlfriend or off at college, so I figured it was just a favor for a friend's mom. I said, "Sure, no problem." It was nothing out of the ordinary. But when I showed up, she didn't just ask me to move boxes. She handed me a cup of coffee and told me to sit with her for a minute before I started. I thought that was strange. She usually wasn't the type to invite me to hang out unless Kyle was around, but I sat down. She had been rearranging the living room and the place looked great. She seemed so much more relaxed than usual. We started talking like we always did, but this time it felt different, more personal. She asked about school, my plans for the summer, and then she just started talking about herself, about how it felt like her life had become all about Kyle and her husband, and how she didn't know who she was outside of that anymore. "I feel like I'm just fading into the background," she said, her voice quieter. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't prepared for this side of her. All I could think was how much I wanted to say something comforting, but nothing felt right. So I just nodded and told her it made sense, that people often lose themselves in their roles. But the conversation didn't stop there. She opened up more talking about how lonely she felt, how her husband was always traveling for work, and how Kyle was so focused on his own life. No one really checks in on me anymore, she said, her voice quieter. I didn't know what to say. Honestly, I wasn't sure I could fix any of that for her, but I listened. I could tell she appreciated that. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people talking about things they didn't say out loud to anyone else. The whole thing felt so genuine, and maybe that's why I felt so caught off guard. I didn't expect her to talk like that, to make me feel like I mattered in her world. It was all so unexpected, and it made me see her in a different way, not just as Kyle's mom, not just the woman who had taken care of things for so long, but as a person who was struggling in her own quiet way. We finished moving the boxes, and after that, she didn't just say goodbye. She asked me if I wanted to hang out for a bit. That's when she pulled out the old board game we used to play at her house when I was younger, and we sat down at the kitchen table and played. We were laughing, joking around like we hadn't done in years. It felt like I was spending time with a friend, not a grown woman who was way older than me, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't just friendship anymore. There were these moments when our eyes met and we'd both hold the gaze a little longer than necessary, like there was something unspoken between us, something neither of us was ready to acknowledge. Every time our hands brushed when we passed a game piece or reached for a card, it felt intimate, not in a physical way, just emotionally, like I was seeing a side of her that no one else saw. I started going over more often. She'd ask for help with little things around the house and I'd show up. Sometimes it was fixing a broken chair. Other times it was helping her set up the new TV. But it was never just about the tasks. There were always those moments afterwards she'd sit with me, offer me coffee, and we'd talk about everything and nothing at all. She'd ask about my day, what I was thinking about, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone. There was one Saturday afternoon when I went over to help her set up a new bookshelf. After we finished, she invited me to stay for lunch. I didn't really want to leave, and I think she could tell, so we ended up sitting on the porch afterward, eating, talking about anything that came to mind. She mentioned a book she had read recently, some classic novel, and I admitted I hadn't read it. She seemed surprised, but in a teasing way, and we joked about my terrible taste in books. But there was a moment during that conversation that caught me off guard. She looked at me, really looked at me and said, "You know, you're easy to be around. I feel like I can actually breathe when you're here. You don't make me feel like I'm just someone's mom or wife. You make me feel like I'm me again." Her words hit me hard more than I expected. I don't think she realized what she just said, but it resonated with me in a way that left me speechless. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't flirty, it was just a statement of honesty, something raw and real. And somehow it made everything feel different. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, trying to play it cool, even though inside my head I was swirling with a million thoughts. Instead, I made a joke about how I didn't know I was so important, and we both laughed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about helping her with a bookshelf or fixing her Wi-Fi anymore. It was about something more, something unspoken. That day I went home with this heavy feeling that I couldn't shake. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't regret, it was just this pull, this feeling that something was happening between us, something that neither of us was quite ready to address. And that was the hardest part. The waiting, the wondering, the feeling like I was standing at the edge of something, but not knowing if I should take the step forward or walk away. And that was only the beginning. By the time the third month rolled around, things had changed, but not in ways I expected. There was a tension now subtle but undeniable hanging in the air whenever I was around Jenna. It wasn't something she said or did specifically, but it was in the way she looked at me sometimes, the way her voice would soften when she spoke to me. It was like we were both walking around this invisible line, trying not to cross it, even though we both knew it was there. I think it was during a night when we were sitting on the porch again, just the two of us, that I realized how much had shifted. It had become a routine. She'd ask me to come over to help with something around the house, and I would end up staying for hours. We talked for ages about everything her childhood, my plans for the future, the kind of books we liked. And somewhere along the way, the small talk started to fade into deeper, more meaningful conversations. That night, the conversation turned to relationship, not her marriage. She never talked about that directly, but the idea of companionship in general. She asked me, "Do you think it's possible to truly be happy alone?" I wasn't sure how to answer, so I just shrugged. I didn't think it was that simple. I think she was looking for something more, something she wasn't quite ready to admit, and I wasn't sure if I was willing to dig deeper, but she pushed. I mean, do you ever feel like there's someone out there that you just connect with? She asked, her voice suddenly softer, more vulnerable than I was used to hearing. She was staring at her hands, fidgeting a little with the sleeve of her sweater, like she didn't want to look at me directly. That was the moment I felt it. There was an almost desperate energy in her question, something that made me feel like I couldn't just brush it off. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to act like I didn't understand what she was asking. I knew exactly what she meant. I had felt it too, only I tried so hard to bury it. "I think everyone's looking for that, right?" I said, keeping my voice light. "Someone who gets them, someone who just makes sense." She nodded slowly, her eyes still avoiding mine. "Yeah, but what if you never find it? What if the person you're supposed to connect with is just not available?" There was a quiet bitterness to her words, something almost unspoken. I could feel the weight of them, like she was saying more than she meant to. I stayed silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. I could tell this was deeper than just a passing conversation. There was something she was struggling with, something she didn't know how to voice, and I could feel the lines between us blurring more and more. I wasn't sure if I should step back or lean in, but I didn't have to say anything. She spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You ever feel like there's just something wrong about feeling so connected to someone you can't have?" That hit me like a punch in the gut. For a second, I froze. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to admit that I had been feeling the same way for the past few months. That every time I looked at her, my mind would wander to places it shouldn't. That every time we laughed together, I couldn't help but notice how easy it was to talk to her. How in some strange way it felt like we were more than just two people passing time. But I couldn't say that out loud, not then, not when I wasn't sure what she really meant. Instead, I changed the subject, talking about something safe, something that would distract us from the tension in the air. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that nothing was happening between us. I wasn't sure if she knew exactly what was going on, but I was starting to think she did. And the more I tried to act like everything was fine, the harder it became to breathe around her. Over the next few weeks, things didn't get easier. If anything, they got more complicated. Jenna started reaching out to me more often, asking for help with random things around the house, even if it wasn't urgent. And every time I walked through that door, I could feel the shift. It wasn't about fixing a broken lamp or moving a piece of furniture anymore. It was about the silence after the work was done, the moments when she'd look at me and I'd feel like I was walking on thin ice, not knowing if I should step closer or pull away. But we kept going, kept pretending like nothing was changing. She'd smile at me, make me coffee, and I'd stay a little longer than I should, all the while knowing that something was building between us, something I wasn't sure I could stop anymore, even if I wanted to. And honestly, I wasn't sure I did. The months were slipping by faster than I realized, and with every passing week, the line between what was real and what was just a quiet, unspoken tension blurred more. It was getting harder to just chalk it up of me helping out a friend's mom. The little things, the way she'd look at me, the moments when we'd just sit in silence, the conversations that felt more intimate than they should have been kept happening. And even though I told myself it was nothing, it was becoming clearer that it wasn't nothing. It was a Wednesday night when things really started to get complicated. Jenna called me again asking if I could come by and help her set up some new furniture. She was redecorating the living room, and she mentioned earlier that she was feeling a bit overwhelmed by it all. I didn't think twice about it. I'd been over so many times by now that it felt routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But that night, as I walked in, something felt different. She greeted me at the door just like always, but this time there was an odd kind of nervous energy to her. She seemed like she was holding back, and it didn't take long for me to feel it too. We set to work right away, moving the couch and chairs, but the whole time I could sense the distance between us, like we were both on the edge of something, and neither of us knew how to take the first step. When the work was finally done, it was getting late. I was about to leave, but she stopped. She stood in the doorway and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Hey, could you stay a little longer?" It was the way she said it, gentle, almost hesitant, that made my stomach twist. I was tired, ready to go home, but something inside me told me I couldn't just walk out like everything was fine. Of course I said, forcing a smile, even though I felt a knot in my chest. We sat down in the new living room, and she poured us both some wine like it was the most normal thing in the world. I hadn't expected that. Jenna wasn't someone who drank much, at least that's what I had always thought, but she seemed different that night, more relaxed. She passed me a glass, and we clinked them together in a quiet toast. We didn't speak for a moment, both of us just staring at the glasses in our hands, like we were trying to gather our thoughts. Then she said, "I'm glad you're here." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. It wasn't a simple statement, I knew that. She was telling me something, but I wasn't sure what. I wanted to respond, to say something comforting or lighthearted, but my throat felt tight, like I couldn't get the words out. Instead, I just nodded, but that was all it took. The silence between us deepened, and I could feel the tension growing. It wasn't the same easy atmosphere I was used to. I was aware of every little movement she made, every glance she shot my way, and I was pretty sure she was just as aware of me. "You know, I don't have a lot of people to talk to," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but steady. I have friends, but sometimes it feels like no one really understands what it's like to be where I am." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I didn't know what it was like to be in her shoes, to feel the weight of everything she was carrying, but I could tell she was hurting, even if she was trying not to show it. I understand I said not even sure if I did, but wanting to say something, anything to make her feel heard. She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze lingering like she was searching for something in my eyes. The air between us felt thick, charged. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. It was like everything was building up to this moment, this one conversation that neither of us had been willing to have. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she said softly, almost like she was talking to herself. "I just feel so lost." Her words hit me hard, more than I expected. There was something in her voice, something so raw and vulnerable, that I felt myself responding to it in a way I couldn't ignore. I wasn't sure if it was pity or something else, but I couldn't just sit there and say nothing. "You don't have to figure everything out right now," I said, trying to offer her something comforting. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." I could see the relief in her eyes as I spoke, but there was still something unsaid between us. I knew we were standing on the edge of something, but I didn't know what it was or what it would mean if we took that step. After a few minutes, she stood up and stretched, breaking the silence. "I should probably get some sleep," she said with a small smile, trying to brush off the heavy conversation we had just had. "Thanks for staying, though. I needed someone to talk to." I got up to leave, feeling a sense of relief that the tension had finally broken. But as I reached the door, she looked at me one last time, and I saw something in her eyes that made my heart skip a beat, something I couldn't name. It was a look that said everything without saying a word. "Good night," she said softly, and I could hear the unspoken weight in her voice. I left that night with a million thoughts swirling in my head. I knew I couldn't keep pretending like everything was normal. The feelings were there, undeniable, and I was starting to realize just how much of a mess I was getting myself into. But at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to walk away, and I don't think she wanted me to either. By now, I had reached a point where everything had become too complicated to ignore. What had started as a few innocent conversations, a little helping hand, had turned into something else entirely. There was no denying it anymore. There was a connection between Jenna and me that couldn't just be brushed under the rug. It wasn't about her being my friend's mom anymore, and it wasn't about me trying to be a good guy. It was about two people caught in a web they didn't know how to get out of, and it had gone too far. That night, I knew things were finally coming to a head. Jenna had asked me to come over for dinner, just like we'd done so many times before. But this time, I wasn't sure if it was just dinner. There was something different in the air. The way she'd been acting, the last few days, the way our conversations had shifted, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a casual meeting. She had something she wanted to say, and I had a feeling it was going to change everything. When I arrived at her house, she was already sitting at the dining table waiting. There was no awkwardness, just that same quiet tension between us. She smiled, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal again. But I could see it in her eyes, the same conflict I'd been feeling for weeks now. She wasn't sure what to do, but neither was I. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on both of us. We ate, but the food didn't taste as good as it usually did. It was hard to focus on anything but the heavy silence. And when the meal was over, Jenna stood up, walked over to the window, and looked outside. For a long time, I knew something was coming, and I wasn't ready for it. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling just slightly. "I can't keep pretending this isn't happening," she said, not turning to face me. Her words hit me like a punch. "I've tried, but I can't. I know what we've been doing, and I can't keep living in this lie." I didn't know what to say. I'd expected this, but hearing it out loud made everything real. The thoughts I had been pushing away for so long, the guilt, the shame, it all came rushing forward. This was it, the moment we both knew had to come. "Jenna," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I don't want to hurt you, but I don't know what to do either. This isn't just some mistake. It's more than that. But I can't keep pretending I'm okay with it or that it's not wrong." She turned to face me, then her eyes filled with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's wrong, but I feel something, and I can't ignore it anymore." She paused, her breath shaky. "But I also know it's not going to work. It can't. We can't keep doing this." For a moment, we just stood there, neither of us knowing what to say. The truth had finally come out, and it was clear to both of us that the line had been crossed. There was no going back. The romance, the attraction, it was real, but it was also dangerous. I had been trying to ignore it, but we both knew it was too late. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me. "I think we both knew this was coming," I said, the weight of the words hanging heavy between us. "I care about you. I do. But I don't think we're meant to be together, not like this." She nodded slowly, the tears welling up in her eyes. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you or anyone, but I can't keep living in this denial." I walked over to her, my heart breaking for both of us. I reached out and touched her arm gently, trying to offer her some comfort. "You don't have to apologize. This was never about hurting anyone. It's not right." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us loud and painful. There was no more pretending, no more wishful thinking. What we had shared, what we had felt, wasn't something we could continue. It was time to let it go. "I'll leave," I said, my voice quiet. "I'll go, but I think it's better for both of us if we just move on." She didn't argue. She didn't say anything. Instead, she just nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. I could see the pain in her eyes, but also something else, relief. Maybe she knew deep down that this was the right thing to do, even if it was the hardest thing. I left that night and I didn't look back. The truth was out, and so was my decision. It was over. There were no more secrets between us, no more what ifs. We had crossed a line we couldn't uncross, but we had both made the choice to step back. It was the only choice that made sense. As I drove home, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of sadness and freedom. It was over, but it wasn't the end of everything. I knew it was the right decision, but I also knew that I would never forget the time we had shared. And that's how it ended. No grand conclusion, no dramatic final moment, just two people deciding that sometimes the hardest thing to do is let go. The story of Tom and Jenna delivers a deeply emotional life lesson about the necessity of recognizing and respecting boundaries when emotions threaten to blur moral lines. Tom's evolving relationship with Jenna, his best friend's mother, illustrates how innocent interactions can unexpectedly deepen into something complex and forbidden. Their shared vulnerability, Tom's aimlessness and Jenna's loneliness created a genuine connection, but their ultimate decision to step back teaches us that true strength lies in honoring commitments to others even at the cost of personal desires. Jenna's courage in acknowledging the impossibility of their bond and Tom's resolve to protect his friendship with Kyle highlight the importance of prioritizing integrity over fleeting temptation. This narrative reminds us that human connections, while beautiful, must be navigated with care to avoid hurting those we value most. It's a poignant call to listen to our conscience, confront uncomfortable truths, and make choices that preserve trust and respect, even when it means letting go of something that feels profound. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between desire and duty? Your stories inspire and connect our community. If this tale touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to join our journey of raw, emotional storytelling. Let's keep exploring life's toughest lessons together.